Hey guys, this is Lisa from NYC Gal Out. Welcome back to my channel. Today's episode, we are doing a true crime. The brutal murder of 18-year-old Kelsey Grammer. You might not be familiar with that name. However, the name that you will be familiar with is Kelsey Grammer. Kelsey Grammer is an actor best known for the role of Frasier. Frasier was a longtime sitcom, and it was actually a spin-off of a very popular sitcom, Cheers. Cheers, of course, is about a bar in Boston, and there was a whole cast of characters, and it had a very catchy theme song. Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name. We're going to get into the brutal murder of his younger sister, Karen. She was 2 years younger than him, and she was murdered in Colorado Springs, Colorado. So on July 8th, 1975, Grammer, who was 20 years old at the time, was home with his family in Pompano Beach, Florida, when detectives knocked on his door and let him know that they had discovered a Jane Doe. Now, at this time, she was reported missing, which is why the detectives came looking for him. Grammer flew out to Colorado to see if the Jane Doe was his sister, and he did identify her as his missing sister. Karen was killed 1 week earlier and just 2 weeks shy of her 19th birthday. Grammer is coming out with a memoir, and the title is Karen, A Brother Remembers, which looks back on the brutal killing of his sister and how it continues to impact him 50 years later and throughout his life. He stated, for a long time, the grief was so dominant that I couldn't access happiness. Now, if you guys are a fan of the Bravo universe, the Bravo Real Housewife franchises, you will also be familiar with his ex-wife, Camille Grammer, from Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Their divorce kind of played out while she was on the show. Let's get on to what happened. After a semester of college in Georgia, Karen had relocated to Colorado Springs to be with her boyfriend. She last spoke to Grammer on June 30th, 1975, when they discussed her plans to come home to Florida after the 4th of July. The day after their call, she died. When Grammer didn't hear from his sister, he got suspicious and called the police. He later learned that at 11 p.m., just hours after their conversation, she went to Red Lobster, where she worked, to wait for a friend to finish their shift. According to Grammer's recount of the police report, 3 men arrived at Red Lobster with plans to rob the restaurant. Upon seeing Karen, they pulled out a gun and told her to come with them. She was taken to one of the men, Freddie Glenn's car, and left with him while the 2 others went into the Red Lobster, which they ultimately decided against robbing. When they returned to Glenn's car, Karen was tied up next to him. The men drove her to one of their apartments, where they took turns raping her. Then they drove Karen to an alley where Glenn stabbed her 42 times. He stabbed her to death. In the years after learning of his sister's brutal murder, Grammer, whose dad Alan had also been killed several years prior, grappled with how to cope with his overwhelming grief. There was some times I pretty much surrendered to despair, Grammer said. In his new book, the actor opens up about his past struggles with alcohol and substance abuse. Between 1988 and 1996, he faced multiple charges for drunk driving and cocaine possession, ultimately going to rehab at the Betty Ford Center. I always had something in the back of my head saying, okay, that's enough now, cut it out, you know why you're doing this. But there was the other part of me that wanted to surrender to it and go, let it mess you up a little bit, let it hurt. Despite his internal struggles, Grammer continued to wake up and go to work, starring in the NBC sitcom Cheers. It seemed to make it more damning in a way, but you know what? I had to do it, so I'm okay, he said. I learned that I really am a I don't quit kind of guy. I can look at the past and see, oh well, you still did what you had to do. Glenn was convicted of murdering Karen along with 2 accomplices, including Michael Corbett. Glenn was also tried in separate trials for murdering 2 other men in June 1975 per the Denver Post, Daniel Van Loan and Winfred Profits. According to CBS News, Glenn killed Loan, a motel cook who was 28 years old at the time, during a botched robbery attempt on June 19, 1975. Just a week later, he killed Profit, an Army soldier who was 19 years old, during a drug deal per the outlet. Although he was originally given the death penalty, his sentence was changed in 1978 to life in prison with the possibility of parole per CBS News. Glenn is continuing to serve a life sentence in prison for Karen's and the other men's murders and has been denied parole 4 times. During his first parole request in June 2009, Glenn apologized to the families of the victims, saying, I am sincerely and truly remorseful per the Denver Post. With his next hearing set for 2027, Grammer said that Glenn's excuse are bullshit. His protestation these days are like, well, I don't remember raping her, he said. Though Grammer has found a degree of forgiveness, he is still committed to holding Glenn accountable for his actions. He stated that revisiting the details of his sister's murder for his book was not pleasant or comforting, but ultimately provided ammunition to keep Freddie Glenn in jail. You don't want to eat yourself to pieces because you can't forgive somebody, he said, but it's hard to forgive a person who consciously decided they wanted to murder somebody you love. This wasn't just some temporary issue with him, it was deliberate. I can give you forgiveness, but you're not going to get out of paying for it, Grammer continued. As for the other convicted killers, Corbett died in prison in 2019. The third accomplice's whereabouts is unknown. So if you guys are not familiar with like the personal life or personal story of Kelsey Grammer, he has a very tragic life. Karen, a brother, remembers, which details his sister's brutal murder and the effect that it had him 50 years in the making. She was murdered 50 years ago. But believe it or not, Karen's murder was not the first tragedy. His life has basically been riddled with violent tragedies. Let's go into that a little bit. In 1968, his father, Alan, was shot and killed at his home in St. Thomas by a taxi driver amid a wave of racial violence following the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. In 1980, his paternal half-brothers, twins Billy and Stephen, were killed in a suspected shark attack while scuba diving in the Virgin Islands. Not just one brother, but both brothers, which Grammer writes about. Grammer grappled with whether to include the graphic and personal review of Karen's last moments from the police report in his book. Though delving into details was not pleasant or comforting, he ultimately decided there is something beneficial in knowing the truth. It is ammunition to keep Freddie Glenn in jail.